Aquarius is the sign of the outsider, the outcast, the rebel, the technologist, and the visionary. And with a stellium of planets all moving into this sign in February, we're likely to see this archetype writ large, both in our personal lives and in the wider world. On January the 21st, Pluto moved into Aquarius, a tectonic shift that has historically correlated with revolutions in societal structures, technology, and our understanding of our place in the world. In February, several planets will conjoin Pluto in Aquarius and bring activations of this transition into our lives. It may be a time to think less about what we want for ourselves as individuals and more about our roles and responsibilities within the collective. But this also looks like a fascinating month from the perspective of the consummation of desire. Venus and Mars have been engaged in a kind of dance for several months now and have signified a storyline of unfulfilled desires. But in February, the lovers finally meet. And in this episode, we'll also explain why Valentine's Day, February the 14th, looks likely to be a day to remember, although perhaps not in the conventionally romantic way you might expect. So welcome to another monthly forecast in which I'll be joined as ever by SJ Anderson and Steph Koyfman. Settle in and get ready for a concise lowdown on what February will bring for you and for the wider world. But before we look at the coming month's astrology, let's take our usual look back at the previous month, January. In earlier forecasts, we talked about how Pluto at the final anaretic degree of Capricorn might signify a return to some of the stories of institutional corruption and excess that we saw over the past 15 years as Pluto transited through that sign. And it certainly did, with the public release of hundreds of revealing documents connected to the late and infamous Jeffrey Epstein on January the 3rd. There were also important developments related to themes that emerged at the Libra eclipse in October.
The January 11 new moon took place at the bendings of the nodes, which means it was squaring the lunar nodes. And usually when that happens, when the sun particularly hits that point, it represents some sort of stepping stone between eclipses, turning the corner in some way, some sort of further consequences from events that came about during the eclipse. So on the exact day of that new moon, the International Court of Justice began to hear South Africa's genocide case against Israel at The Hague.
And it's just how nodal January was and how eclipsy it was. It was the stopping off place between eclipses. We had the border crisis in January really picking up. There were stories of the mayor of New York saying, hey, we need help. We're closing down the city. We're going to go after bus companies that are busing migrants from Texas to New York. And remember, we have two eclipses crisscrossing right over Texas, and January saw a new moon in Capricorn right square. The lunar nodes are at the south bending, and so that was activated in January's astrology.
And there was a bizarre story out of Miami with all sorts of social media reports claiming that 10 feet tall aliens had appeared in a mall and the police had responded in huge numbers but then covered it all up.
Mercury in Sagittarius square Neptune in Pisces did give the first part of January a slightly unhinged flavor, and the Miami Mall alien incident was a particularly good example of this.
Was this some kind of strange internet delusion fueled by attention seekers? Was it a prank or psychological operation of some kind? Or did something paranormal really happen?
So whether or not any of that is true, it does show us something about the essential nature of a really debilitated slow Mercury applying to square Neptune.
We also noted that a strengthened Mars in Capricorn could be good for getting things done at the start of this new year, but might signify the potential for expansions to armed conflict. And unfortunately, we saw exactly that with the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and the US and UK bombings in Yemen in response. With Pluto transiting out of Capricorn and the Red Sea currently unsafe for shipping, we're seeing the beginnings of the end of the globalized trading order. With that recap out the way, let's now head into our first notable development of the month, which is a stellium of planets congregating in the sign of the water bearer, Aquarius. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do click the like button and subscribe if you'd like to make sure you don't miss future episodes on this channel. Thanks. This will be a deeply Aquarian month, with 5 planets all spending some time in the sign of the water bearer at some point in February. The Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto.
So there's this major moment where we have to say, what is Aquarius? What does it mean? What does the archetype do? And how does it function in our world and in our lives? Remember with these Aquarius activations that Jupiter and Saturn met in Aquarius in 2020. We've been living in an Aquarian reality, in a world of the Aquarian, you might say. And this may give you confidence to maneuver within the Aquarian, knowing you've already been riding this sort of Aquarian wave.
If Capricorn season is about setting to work, driven by instinct and the momentum we already have from what has gone before, then Aquarius season is more about channeling that momentum into a vision for the future, one that's more untethered to the past.
So the core of Aquarius and the core of that archetype, in my view, is the idea of innovation, freshness, newness, new ideas, new approaches to reality, new orders.
One of the best ways to understand a sign is by comparing it to its opposite. If Leo is solar, it's about the existential condition of main character syndrome, and Aquarius is Saturnian and sees things as an outsider would. If Leo represents the center, Aquarius is the margins. When planets are transiting Aquarius, they're often better able to do logic and analysis and systemic thinking. So this is one of the reasons why Mercury might actually do pretty well here.
We've talked a lot about Pluto in Aquarius on this channel. What's interesting about February is that we now get several personal planets moving into this sign: the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars.
Mercury will enter Aquarius on the 5th of February. Mars enters on the 13th of February, followed by Venus on the 16th.
So this may be a time when the Aquarian nature of the times becomes more personal, where we can tap into these greater collective streams in our everyday lives. This might look like innovating or using new technologies, or experimenting with alternative social arrangements in certain parts of our lives.
Mercury is noting, it's verbalizing changes, it's expressing things, even listing things on a piece of paper. You might want to write, what is happening so far in 2024? Use Mercury in Aquarius. What are the new worlds that you are sustaining? Mars can be action and power, those are its keywords, but we might focus on those goals and tasks already in play that you want to continue during the winter. You know, the winter can often be a cold month of endurance and wanting to fight and stay with, and I think Mars really helps us here.
Venus in Aquarius has very niche tastes and sensibilities. Venus in Aquarius doesn't do basic. Venus in Aquarius isn't into mainstream things. It's attracted to things that are smart and intellectual. So now we're taking Mars and Venus topics, which involved desire and attraction and repelling and love and war, and maybe we're intellectualizing some of those things, or we're bonding or clashing over ideas, or maybe we're going about some of those things in a way that feels contrary to conventional wisdom.
In terms of the outer world, remember we're in a Zoom era. That's what I've been calling it. Jupiter and Saturn conjoined in 2020. Saturn entered Aquarius in 2020. Jupiter and Saturn conjoined in Aquarius. But once 2020 hit, it's like Zoom everywhere. You know, and I think that's a perfect example when you see new mechanisms. This can be the Aquarian, new wisdom and new mechanisms that become a vehicle, and that allows us to pour into reality our spirit. The Apple Vision Pro is that new headset that was announced when Pluto was in Aquarius originally back in 2023. Dan and I, in our review video, were like, look at this Apple thing. It's going to become bigger. Apple announced they're going to release that Vision Pro in February, and that it comes out with a major Aquarian activation is a perfect example of new mechanisms, new ideas that then have structures through which reality can come through these structures, and we can have a more robust life.
And another theme of Pluto in Aquarius that we've come back to time and time again is the rebellion and centering of the marginal. And we can clearly see that playing out already in the Red Sea, and in particular through the actions of the Houthi fighters of Yemen.
You know, the Houthi rebels are the underdog in this case. By all viewpoints, they should be losing. Yet they're these guerrilla fighters using little boats, and they're blocking huge shipping lanes and affecting the power structure of reality. The empire, you might say, the empire of global capital is under threat from these small boats that are maneuvering right there in these straits near Yemen. So just an example of how you have power being decentralized, and the margins are pitting themselves against the higher level power structure. We may see more of that geopolitically as some of the Aquarian comes into being here.
So Aquarian themes will be loud this month. But what's also interesting is that every planet that ingresses into the sign will have to start its journey with a meeting with Pluto. with Pluto in the first degree of Aquarius for most of the month. Each planet that ingresses into that sign will first conjoin Pluto, the lord of the underworld, and the planet of power, secrecy, and manipulation. And so the dates of all three of these conjunctions are worth paying attention to. First, Mercury conjoins Pluto in the first degree of Aquarius on February the 5th.
Pluto's influence changes things. So this is no longer just thinking about things rationally or using technology or talking about fringe topics, but it's Mercury with Pluto. So now we're diving into conspiracy theories and we're researching something obsessively, and maybe we're thinking or talking about something that might disturb or unsettle us a little bit.
So Mercury with Pluto is the notation of the depth of the power. We might want to be noting what's the deep thing that is happening? What's the fated or soul-oriented thing that's being triggered that we're writing now? For me, one way to think about Pluto is it's destroy to rebuild. It's destruction for the purposes of rebirth. And so that might be one way to use Mercury-Pluto right in 0 degrees Aquarius is what needs to be destroyed or what has been destroyed with Pluto in Capricorn. What's now coming online to assert and rebuild.
Valentine's Day, February the 14th, will be interesting to say the least this year because that day will see a conjunction of Mars and Pluto, again at that first degree of Aquarius.
This is no longer just a Mars and Aquarius story, but it's a Mars-Pluto one. So, the scale of the destruction might be bigger. This is not just a Mars that's getting its emotions out of the way to get the job done, but it's Mars with Pluto, so there's a little bit of a vengefulness. Or maybe we're getting a glimpse into a destructive technology that doesn't think or feel the way that a human would. Which sounds a lot like the AI and the drone warfare that we already have.
Mars and Pluto, I think, will render things inconsequential. Mars is going to come and say, nope, cut, excise, remove, all that doesn't matter anymore. And I would hold out for surprises here.
This looks like it may be a landmark date in terms of the wars taking place around the world, one that fits with the theme of a conflict between the center and the margins.
Mars and Pluto conjoin on Valentine's Day during a Moon North Node conjunction in Aries. This isn't the most romantic astro weather. Truthfully, it does seem as though there could be some sort of escalation of war around the 13th or the 14th. But it does make me think about the pagan origins of Valentine's Day. In ancient Rome, February 15th marked the Feast of Lupercalia, which was meant to usher in fertility and purification, but it was actually kind of bloody and violent in practice. So the holiday began with an animal sacrifice, and then the priests would smear the blood on their foreheads and wash it off, and then they would run around whipping women with strips of hide that they cut from the sacrificed goats in order to promote fertility and good health. Men would also choose the names of women from jars, and they would couple up together for the duration of the festival. Sometimes they would fall in love and they would stay together. So this year, maybe we're not doing a roses and chocolate Valentine's Day. Maybe the vibe is more whipping each other with goat hides to please the old gods.
The Mars-Pluto conjunction is right on Valentine's Day, and that might make for some serious conversation or some bold moves of depth and weight.
And then on February the 17th, it will be Venus's turn to meet with Pluto.
This is not just Venus in Aquarius, it's Venus-Pluto. So now maybe we're coveting something. And it's about compulsive attachments, and it's about obsessing over something or someone that you want.
And then Venus and Pluto, deep rearrangements in how we feel pleasure and enjoyment at every step of the way. So there may be rediscoveries about what is truly pleasurable, and admitting to oneself, hey, I actually don't like that. That thing I thought I liked, that I was supposed to like, that my culture and family told me I needed to like, that doesn't mean anything to me actually. And admitting that to oneself, I don't actually enjoy it.
As we've explained before, the first degree of Aquarius is a hot degree in the current historical period because in December 2020, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn there. And if we look at what was happening at that time, this was when the first COVID vaccines appeared, as well as the first AI text-to-image models like OpenAI's DALL-E. And so the ingresses of these planets could be accompanied by stories related to those subjects. And as if all this Aquarian activation wasn't already enough, the month also features a new moon in the sign of the water bearer. On February the 9th, we'll see a new moon at 20 degrees and 40 minutes of Aquarius. This is yet another new moon, like last month's, that is in close aspect to Uranus in Taurus. This time it's in a square to Uranus, giving it a strong sense of systems, structures, and the order of things being severely shaken up here.
The new moon is squaring Uranus pretty closely. So in addition to the intensity and the passion and the stormy contradictions that are kind of coming out of this big Aquarius pileup, there's also this itch to liberate or free ourselves from an idea or some sort of box that we're in. We're kind of struggling against our destiny or a sense of being trapped in this kind of Groundhog Day loop of repeating circumstances, and we sense an opening, we sense a moment where we can sort of interrupt the pattern.
It's interesting to see all this Uranian activation in the all-important lunations at the time when Pluto is beginning its journey through Aquarius. There's a congruence in those astrological signatures.
I'm thinking about the aspects in this chart. It's kind of like a choose your fighter. Do you want Mercury and Pluto in Aquarius with the sun and the moon, or are you wanting Uranus and Jupiter squaring from Taurus? So you have this square relationship in the fixed axis. So the Aquarian side of it is kind of pure power innovation. There's that on the one hand, and there may be some turmoil as we're like trying to focus on, hey, I've got this going in my outer life and I want to do this now and I'm trying to implement this new plan. And then the Taurian, which is very much internalized and home-oriented, the realms of bodily comfort, the realms of close-knit relationships, family and home. That tension is built in here. With this new moon, Uranus might offer some surprising ways forward.
Here's the astro map of this new moon. It shows where in the world it'll be going exact on one of the angles, which are the most powerful points in any astrological chart. And we can see here that once again, it's highlighting East and Southeast Asia and the South China Sea. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see these parts of the world in the news in a significant way over the course of the month that follows.
The moon is rising right through the Strait of Taiwan, this new moon, and so you can watch for that situation. It's always escalating, it seems. Every year there's more escalations. But it is the center of these tech battles of the current world order with the chip production in Taiwan. And keep in mind a story in January, China sanctioned the US over its arms support for Taiwan. So China says, I'm going to sanction these companies, you're supplying arms to the Taiwanese, we don't like that. So again, more escalations. China has moon in Aquarius, America has moon in Aquarius in the Sibley. This is a major story to watch here during this new moon and during the month of February.
But that's enough Aquarius talk for now. Let's move to something quite different. On February the 19th, we'll see a conjunction of the asteroid Chiron and the north node of the moon. But this configuration will be close enough to be felt throughout this month. Chiron represents the archetype of the wounded healer. It's that deep, unhealable wound that each of us carries and reckons with over the course of our lives, but which we can transmute into healing for others.
This is big, because Chiron in Aries is a major player in 2024, and the North Node in Aries is a major player.
This feels like a bigger deal than it maybe normally would be, because April's North Node eclipse is conjunct Chiron to the minute. So this conjunction feels like it might be setting us up for April's eclipse in some way.
And so feel into your Chiron here in February. What deeper pains are in play right now for you? What grief and sadness are you holding or processing? Grief's like that, isn't it? It just stays with us. And I've got many people I've loved that have gone and are dead, and the world's never the same. It's never the same. I miss him dearly. I want to call, my uncle, for example. I loved him so much and just check in, but I'll never be able to do that ever again. And I feel that woundedness with me, but I carry it now into my life, and I talk about him when I need to. He taught me so much. I will share his wisdom with others. Just an example of how we might feel into our Chiron.
The north node of the moon is one of the two eclipsing points, and this is why it was known as the head of the dragon in traditional astrology. It was seen that in an eclipse, the sun or moon was eaten. In Indian astrology, the north node is known as Rahu and is seen as representing unquenchable hunger for the pleasures and perks of the material world. A conjunction between Chiron and Rahu might stimulate certain hungers in us, linked to ways in which we're wounded. Perhaps we might think of the image of the hungry ghost here, the figure of a spirit with appetites and yearnings that can never be satisfied.
Chiron North Node can amplify the wounding and the heartbreak and the vulnerability, but it also puts us in touch with the medicine. My sense here is that the Mars-Venus-Pluto combination might be pulling us into some patterns that might be a little bit compulsive and even unhealthy. Venus-Mars conjunctions have a way of making us want things that we can't easily have, and I think especially with the added influence of Pluto, it might make us want something that might be potentially destructive to our lives in some way. Or it wakes us up out of our complacency and makes it hard to feel satisfied with what we have. At the very least, I think it's going to be hard to stay emotionally regulated around things.
On a mundane level, we may see this playing out in terms of moves to heal wounds or address historical, political, or cultural grievances. The last time the North Node was conjunct Chiron was October 2008, when these points were in the sign of Aquarius. During that month, Russia's Supreme Court declared that the Romanov family of Tsar Nicholas II were victims of public repression. This royal family had been murdered in 1918 after the Tsar was overthrown in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. At the same time, October 2008 was the height of the subprime mortgage crisis, and various countries were bailing out banks to the tune of vast amounts of cash in a bid to prop up the banking system, which was then in the process of bleeding out as a result of cascading financial problems. Look out in February for moves by states to address wounds and grievances, particularly those related to Aries themes like war, violence, exploration, and colonization.
In terms of the mundane, I'm very interested in Chiron as the wounds for America, with that Chiron return in April and the eclipse visible in America in April. Joe Biden, a lot of talk of him maybe pulling out of the race. You know, in both Biden's chart and in the Sibley chart, they're both Sagittarius rising. The fifth whole sign house is Aries. And we have issues with Hunter Biden. So we have wounds around the child. And this may become more front and center in terms of the news around Biden. Of course, in an election year, you know, it's so vociferous of attacking. That's the Marshall side as well. And we might see more attacks around Hunter Biden, or more issues around Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, I think.
But there's also a very different story playing out in February, and this one concerns Mars and Venus, the lovers. On February the 22nd, Mars and Venus will form a conjunction in the 7th degree of Aquarius, the first time they've conjoined for almost 2 years.
This may be my favorite story of February, which is that Mars and Venus finally conjoin. They finally meet, and they finally perfect a Ptolemaic aspect.
This is an interesting story because these two planets have been engaged in a kind of dance since their last conjunction in March 2022. They haven't perfected an aspect since they formed a sextile in March 2023, almost a year ago. They very nearly conjoined in Leo in the summer of 2023, but Venus, which normally moves much more swiftly than Mars, stationed retrograde on July the 23rd, just before they would have met. And since Venus stationed direct in September, she's been catching up to Mars. The two planets almost made a sextile soon after that, but didn't quite perfect the aspect. And so there's been a storyline of frustrated desire that's been playing out in the sky over the course of the past few months, and perhaps in your personal life. Could that story be about to be resolved?
What was the fish that got away from you last summer, and what are the circumstances that are going to let you catch it this time? But Venus and Mars together often produce something that feels a little bit libidinous or feral, and that's something that can honestly go in either direction.
So what could this be, right? It's Aquarius, so we're dealing with communications and technology and deeper structures. Finally getting the text back from a love interest. Maybe a love interest is finally picking up issues that were lingering or have been lingering all of 2023, and there's finally, hey, let's connect on this, let's make it happen. That dance of romance happening and finally moving forward or resolving one way or the other.
The square from Jupiter, I think, might help turn this experience into something a little bit more pleasurable or enjoyable.
Jupiter can bring justice, that's a key word for it, and there may be a sense of this is how things are going to be set right, finally, in some kind of relational dynamic. It doesn't have to be romantic. This can be relationships of all kinds, but you're setting right, you're putting the relationship in its right place or structure.
Among other things, Venus represents attraction and desire. Mars also has to do with desire, but it's more concerned with the action we take to satisfy it. If Venus is the magnet, then Mars is the iron drawn to it. And in traditional astrology, surprise, surprise, Mars was associated with iron.
In mundane astrology, you sometimes see sex scandals associated with this conjunction. Sure, you know, Venus and Mars together is about going after something that you want, but how you go about it also matters.
It's the dance of pursuit and evasion. That's Mars and Venus. Mars, the pursuer, Venus, the receiver, and you have to get that lined up right. You know, this could even be like someone finally moves to the city, or you have a new car, or a new ability to meet someone or see someone on the regular. Maybe your long distance love decides to move closer. You're finally going to go out and visit and stay for 3 months or something like this.
The combination of all of these aspects makes me think about the myth that the constellation of Aquarius is based on. The water bearer is said to be a representation of Ganymede, the mythological cupbearer to the gods. So Ganymede started out as a handsome prince, and Zeus thought he was hot, so he morphed into an eagle and kidnapped him, and then appointed him cupbearer on Mount Olympus and gave him eternal youth. So there's this dual nature to the symbolism of Ganymede being kind of taken against his will, but then also elevated in the process. Maybe what this allegory is describing is the way that certain desires possess us and make us feel really out of control, but contribute to our higher knowledge or spiritual growth in some way.
So remember, Venus and Mars and Pluto all conjoined right at the beginning of the war in Ukraine in 2022 in Capricorn. And now, just as Mars and Venus are set to conjoin again near Pluto, and they both meet Pluto mid-month here in February, there's been rumors of Switzerland peace talks. Zelensky saying, let's go for some peace. And what if this war in Ukraine was a Mars-Venus conjunction with Pluto, and then a 2-year cycle, now Mars-Venus conjunction with Pluto, and we can hopefully resolve that war? I really do hope so. Have some kind of local resolution or some sort of new peace deal.
And then comes a full moon in Virgo, which is followed soon afterwards by a striking and rare planetary configuration, a double cazimi. On February the 24th, we'll see a full moon in the sign of Virgo. The sun will be flanked by Mercury and Saturn in Pisces at the time of this lunation.
This is a cool one because the last full moon in Virgo perfected and completed just hours, or like an hour before Saturn came to Pisces. So I feel like with this full moon in Virgo here on 24 February, it's almost the Saturn and Pisces check-in. What has Saturn and Pisces been for you? This is the time to say, okay, wow, the new foundations and new structures, the sometimes hard-fought victories that Saturn can pull us into, the things we need to have patience on and take time with and build slowly, and exposing difficulty in our worlds. All that now has been around for about a year, so it's been in a whole sign house for everyone. How's that whole sign house going for you, your Pisces house?
So something to keep in mind is that Mercury is severely debilitated by this point in the month. It spends most of February under the sun's beams, and then it really kind of, enters a wonky state when it enters Pisces. It's the sign of its fall on the 23rd. So just a note for your planning purposes, even though it's not a retrograde, there's about a 2-week period between February 23rd and March 10th. Basically the entire time Mercury is in Pisces, it's kind of a crapshoot.
With the sun together with Saturn opposing the moon, this could be a moment in which the theme of issues with authority come into play.
Don't try to submit your tax returns. Don't try to deal with any important paperwork while all of that is going on.
My sense with Saturn and Pisces is that we want to let the seas take us where they want to take us. Jupiter sextiling from Taurus can assist here. So I think about James Joyce, who had Mercury in Pisces, and Taurus being the home worlds. There might be a personalized Ulysses, that novel of James Joyce, where it's a poetic, creative map of his hometown in Dublin, and it's a profound metaphor for his own world and his own home in Ireland. You might be having some of your own version of that, where you have these poetic expressions, almost nonsensical, and you're feeling into the truth of your home world, whether that's your actual home where you're from or the home around you.
On February the 28th, we'll see a rare and intriguing configuration, a double cazimi of Mercury and Saturn. A cazimi is a moment when a planet is tightly conjunct the sun within 1 degree, according to Hellenistic sources, and even as tight as 17 minutes in the medieval tradition. It's a moment where that planet is raised up, empowered, and bursts into awareness. And here we have that happening with 2 planets at the same time, Saturn and Mercury.
But the triple conjunction on the 28th does feel like a significant moment where something muddy gets elucidated. Or maybe we're able to see or detect something that's normally hard to notice under normal circumstances.
It's 6 February that Mercury falls under the sun's beams. It's 11 February that Saturn comes under the sun's beams. So much of the month, there may be blocks. It may be more Piscean than it otherwise would be, with Mercury, planet of communication, blocked and hidden. Saturn, planet of structure and planet of, the hum of consistency, that blocked. We may be feeling lost here a little bit in February, and dreamy and maybe untethered. And so that builds to the end of the month, to this date on the 28th, when both Saturn and Mercury meet and purify together with the solar light of awareness and wisdom.
This could be a moment of sudden awareness or receiving messages about boundaries or structures in a part of our life when they've generally been missing. That is the Piscean part of our chart.
You think about all these stories that have come out of discovering new plant life in the sea. I just saw one where there was some drilling, I think, in the North Sea, and they were showing pictures of these whole worlds. Now, I've never seen anything like those underground animals that are maneuvering down there. They're like fluorescent and translucent, really weird creatures, undiscovered countries under the ocean. And I think it's a good metaphor, the sea inside of ourselves. There's undiscovered places within ourselves always. And there's a kind of vastness of selfhood that this month and February may be a good time to pause and go inward and let something release here at the end of the month.
At a mundane level, I could see this moment as being one where we receive revelations about old stories connected to oceanic, artistic, or mystical matters.
Think about in the world right now how much the sea and water has been a big player over the last few months. The Houthi rebels in Yemen and the waterways are what is being fought over. Waterways are a major location for action and activity for the next few months as a result of the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces coming up here very soon, and then these cazimis that are happening now and many planets coming into Pisces in February and then into March.
And that's it for this month's forecast. I'm taking some time off readings for now, but both SJ and Steph are available for consultations.
Yeah, go to my website, sjanderson144.com. I've got some new stuff on my site. You can check out this video I just released about planetary color and art and creating color with the planets using some of the rulership schemes. Check out that video. It's called Time is Color. It's one of the big things I've been working on. And I'll talk to you very soon. Everybody have a dreamy February, and I hope you can kind of discover some of that unknown landscape within you to help prepare for eclipse season. Talk soon. Take care.
My usual availability for consultations is in effect this month and next. At the time of this recording, I have 6 spots left for February, and I'm starting to book for March. So if you're a late Aquarius, Pisces, or even an Aries sun, now would be the time to book your birthday reading.
If you enjoyed this video and want to know more about what Pluto's transit through Aquarius might hold, then I suggest you watch this video in which I explored the last time Pluto made its way through that sign between 1777 and 1798. Thanks, and see you next time.